So it is my pleasure to introduce you all to Jay Stinnett. Jay has been sober since 1979. He's a researcher, historian, and the co-founder of the AA History Symposium. He lives in a pretty wonderful place, Sedona, Arizona. And our workshop tonight is going to have Jay explain to us Carl Jung's influence on the founding and the foundation of AA. Let's learn about the Jungian thread. We're really glad you're here.
Delighted to be with you. Hey, everybody. My name is Jay, and I'm a very, very enthusiastic member of Alcoholics Anonymous and of the Al-Anon family groups, and I can qualify for about 7 or 12 other programs, some that probably haven't been developed yet. But anyway, when Patrick asked me to talk about this, I call the talk the Jungian Thread, and it's not about the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm going to tell you a few interesting biographical notes about Carl Jung. In fact, I really liked when the prayer was being read, it was, I thought, everything I know about Jung. and anyway, and then I'll talk a little bit about Jung's background and his professional experiences. Then a little bit about Roland Hazard and the alcoholism that galloped in the Hazard family, and then some interesting information that we've received recently. Some of it because of Ian McCabe's wonderful work on Carl Jung about the Countess Margarita von Lutenthal, and then move into Wilson's Declaration of Independence in 1955, when he turned the movement over to the fellowship, and how it is that he wanted to see the track of his life, the arc of his life progressing. And then finally, talk a little bit about what I think is some of the most thrilling information that we have, which is the correspondence between Jung and Bill Wilson. So that's kind of the arc. I'm just finishing up a biography of Bill Wilson on his life outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's called Bill Wilson and the Frontiers of Consciousness. And Higher Publishing will be making that available next year. So, I always like to invite the spirits of the people I talk about in to help inform my talk. I live in Sedona, Arizona. We live in the fourth dimension. We visit the fifth, and we entertain those who are stuck in the third. And my great joy has been this deep dive that I've been able to do. Another little sidebar for you all. You can now go into the Stepping Stones Foundation's website, and you can get into the digital archive now that's being made available little by slowly, but already there's like 700, 800 pieces of personal letters that were written by Bill and Lois, and some really, really marvelous stuff. I've had the great privilege to be the beta tester for the digital archive, and I've now read over 2,500 of Bill Wilson's private letters. So I feel that what I know about him is what I like to call the coffee shop Bill, and not the public figure. And I really, really urge you, if you have any interest at all in the history of the fellowships, that now we're at a new area that I didn't even know would be possible 10 years ago. Because now you can get the information yourself. You can sit and meditate upon it. And you don't need people like me to interpret and interpolate it. And I just find that to be incredibly compelling because Bill Wilson was one of the most adventurous intellectuals of the 20th century. And the people that he ran with, the folks that he knew, and the conversations that he had with them were at a depth and an insight that just is fantastic. So anyway, Carl Gustav Jung will always be, at least from our point of view, will always be tied to the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was he had a fascinating childhood. His grandmother was a medium. His grandfather learned Hebrew because he thought that was the language that was going to be spoken in heaven, and he wanted to be able to have a leg up when he got there. So the paranormal, the realm of the spirit, the education of the mind beyond mere rationalism that he recommended for people was something that he was brought up with. And he went into medical school, and he did his residency in a clinic called Bergozzi. And it was the first mental hospital that had a foundation in trying to help people with alcoholism. And in his letter with Wilson in 1961, one of the things he says regarding Roland is, he said, "My experience with men of his kind," and I always wondered what that was until just I think about a year and a half ago, I found out about his residency at Bergozzi Clinic. He was working there. He was invited to come and work there by a Dr. Bueller, who was the head of the clinic. And Bueller insisted that anybody that was on staff become a teetotaler, because he felt that it was really important that people see what it's like in a drinking world to recognize, to recommend to people that they don't drink. And so it turns out that our friend Carl Jung was a teetotaler for about 15 years. And while he was there, one of the things that he found is that alcoholics had a very hard time apprehending what it was that he was trying to lead them to spiritually, because they were so locked into the cycle of relapse and recovery and the like. At this time, the physical allergy wasn't quite as well documented as it is now, that people that are allergic types really shouldn't take anything that affects them from the neck up, because of this ease with which one goes back to drink. While he was there at Bergozzi, Bueller, by the way, was the second most famous psychologist in Europe at the time. Freud called him an air shirt, but he was a tremendously successful guy, and he ran this clinic. And there were there were all kinds of folks that were referred there from the upper classes. And Jung started a private practice where some of these well-heeled folks were referred. It's interesting that anytime there's a new psychological or medical or spiritual treatment that comes up, currently I've been fortunate to be sober and involved half the existence of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's fascinating the different fads that have come through over just the 4 decades that I've been around. And, now it's the shamans are going to cure alcoholism. But anyway, so Freud's working there at Bergolzi, and he writes his first book, and it was on the occult and occult phenomenon. And he sent a copy of this to Freud, and Freud read it. And then his second book was on occult and what we now would call schizophrenia. Now, it's also fascinating that throughout treatment of alcoholism in a hospital setting, how many of the people that are schizophrenics have treated themselves with alcohol. They've self-medicated with alcohol. One of the Bill Wilson's closest relationships was with Dr. Humphrey Osmond and Abram Hoffer at Weyburn Hospital up in Regina, Saskatchewan. And they were working with schizophrenics, and they found that they had a lot of alcoholics that there was a crossing. Seems to be about maybe 15%. And they started to use the treatments that they were using with schizophrenics on alcoholics, some of it the psychedelic therapy. And they created many of the templates that are being used again today. So Freud and Jung are having some correspondence, and then a wonderful thing happened. There was an American university, Clark University. Douglas Hall, who was the president there, decided that he wanted to, really get a name for the place, and we need to raise some money, and what should we do? So he turned to William James, and he said to James, who can we get to come over here and give some talks that would really stir things up and get people excited? And James said, well, there's this guy in Austria, Sigmund Freud, and he's come up with this new approach, psychoanalysis, and he'd fit the bill. And so Hall invited Freud, and he asked if there was anybody else that should come along, and Freud suggested you. And so they both came over and gave a series of talks at Clark University. And it was funny. I thought, for years, well, when the two of them were, on the ocean liner going to the New World, they must have been able to spend a lot of time together and the like. And then recently I found out that Freud didn't have the money for a first class ticket. And so we went second class, and Jung's family had money. And so he went first class. And so they didn't spend much time together at all. And anyway, they went and they gave the talks. Jung starts to see during this time in America together that Freud is completely dismissive of anything that does not fit into his narrow definition of how the human psyche works, and that he started to distance himself from him. It's fascinating. Their names are so interchangeable, but they were only associates for about 8 years. I mean, from the very beginning until they realized that they couldn't work together, because Jung believed that, as Wilson said, that man is more than a couple dollars worth of chemicals when broken down. So while they were in America, Jung got together with William James, and they spent time together. They had 2 delightful evenings, and Jung said that he was most impressed by James's complete absence of I'm sorry, that James was open-minded in a way that he was not familiar with. And they talked mostly about the psychology of religion and parapsychology. And I thought for many years that when he was talking about psychology of religion, that he was speaking about it as a field of study. Recently, I've had the good fortune. One of the great things about being a history person is that you get to be wrong publicly and recorded. And one of the things that I've lectured about and enjoyed for many, many years is varieties of religious experience, which is the transcription of some lectures that James gave in Edinburgh in 1902. And I always talked about these 2 types of spiritual experience that James talks about in the book, the sudden and the educational variety. The reason that the educational variety seemed so familiar was, of course, the reference in Appendix 2 in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, where Wilson refers to the book. No place in any of the lectures does it ever use the phrase educational variety. It stunned me. Somebody laid that on me a few weeks ago. And it's not educational, it's volitional. So there's the sudden, and then there's the volitional. When volition is the application of the will, the direction of the will, and that the second type of spiritual experience comes from this application of the will. That's a lot different than educational. Education can almost be passive, but in volition, you have to actually do something, which I think the methodology that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is a fantastic demonstration of what happens when one applies one's will to a set of exercises, as opposed to just sitting around waiting for it to happen or listening. But in varieties, there's a book called The Psychology of Religion by a professor by the name of Edwin Starbuck. And Starbuck, and the preface of this book is by James. And James refers to this book 55 times in varieties. And it's in this book that this deal about the sudden experience and the volitional comes from. And so they were talking about these two types of experience. And again, Jung's thrilled at the lack of intellectual prejudice that Jung possessed, or that James possessed, and how they were able to spend delightful conversation that evening, or those 2 evenings. So they're talking about not only the nature of the spiritual experience, but they're talking about the experience beyond what it is that the 5 senses give us. And I find it very consoling that these great minds were talking about things that are so easily dismissed in this era of the triumph of material reductionism. And so they have this wonderful set of talks that go back to Europe. Freud, interestingly enough, was not a major figure prior to coming to Clark, but his being invited to the United States kind of gave him a cachet that nobody else had at the time, and it really helped accelerate the existence of his work in Europe. Jung moves out of Bergolzi and starts to set up a private practice, and in this private practice, he starts to get all kinds of different people that have problems, that have money, and some of it starts to filter over to the United States. Now, the Hazard family had a very interesting relationship with alcohol. There was a gentleman by the name of Irving Fisher who taught political economy at Yale University, and Fisher was a big-time proponent of prohibition, and he talked about how and the family called Roland. Everybody's called Roland Hazard. Like there's 15 generations of Roland Hazard. The eldest son is always named with the same name, and so they called within the family they called him Roy. And Irving Fisher talked about how whatever moral recovery that Roy may have had at one point or another from not drinking would be destroyed by just one sip of beer. Interesting. One of the Hazard cousins was a gentleman by the name of Leonard Bacon, and Leonard Bacon was later a Nobel Prize winning poet. And Bacon had this dream of someday being able to provide for his family with his poetry, and it ended up that he got a job as professor at the University of California. He was out there at Berkeley, and he was getting widely published, and people were responding to his work greatly. And at one point, he was actually able to resign from his professorship and move his family to Carmel, California. Now, Carmel is about as beautiful a place as you can find. So he's got the girl, he's got the family, he's got the career, he's got everything that he wants. He's living in one of the most beautiful spots there is. There's just something not right. And he tries exercise, and he tries hobbies, and he tries this, and he tries that. But interestingly enough, wine seems to have helped him immensely. So well that 4 years later, his friends from Berkeley are saying, dude, you got a problem, and we don't know what it is, but we've had some friends that have been over to Switzerland, and they've seen this guy Carl Jung, and we think you ought to maybe go and visit Dr. Jung. And Leonard goes, and he has a tremendous experience, and he writes one of his great works after that, and his drinking obsession lifted. Now he comes back, and Roy is one of these guys that he shouldn't be drinking because he just keeps going sideways, and it's really quite embarrassing to everyone, and especially to his wife, and so his wife Helen, she's ready to divorce him after some debacle that they had down in Bermuda, and she knows that Leonard's not drinking, so she gets a hold of Leonard. She says, hey, we really need you to help, and you got to fix the boy. And Leonard comes out, and he meets with Roland, and then he talks with Helen and the like, and he realizes that maybe Helen's not completely without culpability in the situation, shall we say. And so he imposes on the two of them that they should go to Geneva and meet with Jung. And indeed, they end up going to Geneva. Now, it's much earlier than what Wilson thought. Wilson thought it was like 31, 32. It was actually 27 that he was in Geneva, and so they go, and they're staying in the great hotel, and they go and meet with the doctor, and Jung says to Roland, he says, I want you to journal some dreams for me. And Roland says, that night I dreamed 3 corkers. I gave them to the doctor, and the next day he read them, and he said, these are wonderful, but don't dream anymore. Roland wrote to Leonard that afternoon, and he said, old boy, this is the dope for me. Thank God for you and for us coming here. And he got on with you very well. He stayed, it seems, about 2 weeks. That's it. He wasn't under the doctor's care for a year. He stayed about 2 weeks, and then he left. And we don't know how many different periods of sobriety Hazard had. Probably 5 or 6. Some of them 6, 7 months, some of them 4 or 5 years, it appears. But he never had what we would refer to as long-term sobriety. Well, 5 years is forever for an alcoholic, 5 months. But one of the things that's, I think, fascinating, I get asked all the time about, well, did Roland die sober? And there were a lot of people that got exposed to the principles of the Oxford group. And in the Oxford group, your problem was solved spiritually. And there was never this thing about sobriety date and not drinking past that. That's one of the little things that Alcoholics Anonymous has brought into the consciousness of treating alcoholism, was this idea that it's not starting again that's the most important thing. And these people never got that. And so to evaluate them with that set of standards, or, they already had it. Why would they go to AA? That kind of thing. So anyway, Hazard starts to drink again. and he ends up in Africa on a trip, drinking, and he has a horrible health crisis, and he's there for like 6 months. There's just all kinds of different things that happen along the line. He had 2 different conversion experiences that we know of, and then he comes back to the United States, and he gets involved with Sam Shoemaker and the Oxford Group in New York. And this is where his circling in and around Wilson actually comes. The Hazard family had been underwriting a lot of the work at Calvary for many years. If you go to the Calvary Church in New York, there's actually a stained glass window that's dedicated to them because of all the wonderful donations and the like that they did. There's a couple different fun stories. One is that Roland was on the train going to Detroit, and he's reading Vic Kitchen's I Was a Pagan, and he's got a traveling companion with him. He's just knocking away, and he has an experience of identification, and he quits drinking. Another story that's told is he's driving through Rhode Island, again sipping on a little companion, and the voice says, "You don't have to drink anymore," and he tosses the bottle away. And Roland said that he'd never tossed a bottle away before. So anyway, he has this experience, and he gets sober, and everybody's really excited about it. And he gets sober within the Oxford Group, and in the Oxford Group, one of the things that they did at their house parties and at their meetings is the last guy that talked, or the last person that talked, was always the person that was closest to the flame, the person that had the most immediate conversion, because they felt that was where the real heat came from, as opposed to us, where we wait till the person that's got the longest time. And he starts going around and talking at these Oxford Group meetings, and things are going really, really well. And during this time, they find out that, he hears that this guy in the local Abby Thatcher is going to be put away for drinking, and another Oxford Group crony of his was Sebra Graves, and Sebra Graves' dad was the judge that Abby was going in front of. And so Seb and Roland show up, and they go, they say the really important thing to the judge. They say, "Give him to us, we'll take him to New York. We'll get him out of town. We'll solve the problem for you." One of the fun things that you can get if you go on the digital archive at Stepping Stones is what I like to call the first 12-step letter Wilson wrote a guy when he had about 6 weeks sober. And he's talking about, he says, "I know you'll be surprised that I'm on the holy roller coaster." He says, "But I had this friend who came to me. I was, this person that he's writing to, they'd been at Towns Hospital together, and on one of Wilson's previous stops. And he says, I have this friend who used to lock himself in a hotel room with cases of White Logic." And he said, and he'd drink until somebody would come and find him and take him to be dried out. He said the last time that he was in the town of Bennington, Vermont, he was drinking, and he got into a gun battle with the Brooklyn Boys, which I guess was a euphemism for hallucinations, and that he got into a gun battle with them. And that's when the city fathers decided that they were going to have to put him away and as a hopeless inebriate. But Sebra and Roland intervene, and they take him around to talk in a few meetings, and his Ebby's drink obsession leaves, and they take him down to the Calvary mission that Sam Shoemaker and Calvary Church were supporting, and they had a place there that was, they called it a hostel for chronic inebriates. So Ebby's there, and he goes and visits Bill, and Bill has his experience. He has this intervention, this white light experience, this sudden variety, and the next time Ebby comes and he tells him about it, Ebby goes back to the mission and he says, "Hey, my pigeon's all lit up." And they say to him, "Hey, don't worry about it. There's this book, and it's called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And in it, there's a story about an alcoholic having a white light experience. The guy who ran this place, that's his dad. Take him the story of S.H. Hadley and have him read it. And again, if you're going to read Varieties, I always say start where Wilson started, which was on lecture 9. So anyway, Alcoholics Anonymous starts, blah, blah, and I'm here to talk about Jung, not Alcoholics Anonymous, but I have to go down that wormhole a little ways. And it takes off, and it starts to grow. There isn't any real connection between Jung and Wilson until probably about 1943. Wilson's, having this real battle with depression, and I believe it was organic. If you take a look at him, he looks very much like somebody that had Marfan's, Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of different folks. They have those very, very long limbs. And it also appears that he had POTS, which and the reason I say that is that people in Akron used to get upset at him because if he could, he wouldn't stand, he'd sit, and if he preferred to actually sit on the floor. And that's a thing of POTS, which also has a great component of depression to it. Anyway, he starts seeing a psychologist in Nantucket, Francis Weems, and Weems' real contribution. Weems is a Jungian, and the real contribution that was given to Wilson was this insight that it's one thing to live one's life in service to others. It's an entirely different thing if one is supposed to live the life that others want them to live in order to serve them. And Wilson always had this conflict because he saw that he could not have what he described as the participating relationships that every other AA member had. because people either wanted to dominate him or they wanted to put him on a pedestal. He could never be just a regular member. And so Weems really gave him some wonderful insights. Weems also had another client at the time, Marguerite von Lutenkow, who was she had dual citizenship between the United States and Germany, and she'd left at the start of the war. She had been a Union student and been through a lot of therapy with two of Jung's closest associates. And when she came to the United States, she started working at Johns Hopkins Hospital and was working in rehabilitative therapy. And she ended up getting exposed by her therapy with Weems to Bill Wilson, and found out about Alcoholics Anonymous and was captivated by it. Now, one of Wilson's, Wilson believed to the core of his being that Alcoholics Anonymous was a creation and a gift from God. It was not something that he did. And he always was looking for other ways that he personally could make contributions to society, because he did not believe that AA was of him. And one of the things that he had hoped from the beginning, because of his own personality challenges, was that the success that Alcoholics Anonymous had could be brought into the field of what he called general neuroses, that most everybody had some kind of problem, and that maybe AA's methodology might be able to be helpful to them in one way or another. And of course, we've seen now that there have been, hundreds of, horrible conditions addressed by using our methodology. And, but not only that this idea of self-reflection and restitution could be taught to anyone and allow them to have a more dynamic life. In 1945, so von Lutenkow starts coming to the General Service Office a bunch, and they talk about how can she, in her professional life, in her union analytical life as a therapist, start to make this available to people in the general population. She goes to lots of open meetings. Bill starts a group or participates in a group. I don't know whether she started it or not, where there are a bunch of neurotics that are there. Bill said that he was the only one that had not had electroshock therapy, and he felt a little on the outside. He was thinking maybe he might want to get a little jolt of the juice himself. Von Lutenkow, the minute that the war dies down, goes back to Europe. She's going to a conference that she'd always enjoyed of unions at Acuna, Switzerland, and she drops in on Jung, and he's delighted to see her, and she brings a copy of the book Alcoholics Anonymous and some other pamphlets that she'd gotten from the General Service Office. And she's very enthusiastic about telling you about this incredible thing that has happened. Carl Jung had always been very diffident about group work. He felt that what happened is if one had a conversion experience, say at an Oxford group rally, house party, or a YMCA religious rally, or within a organization or an organized church, that what would happen is that the person would no longer take responsibility for their own work, and they would lay it off on the group or on the authority figure, which, is one of the great things about the Oxford group is that Frank did his best to say, no, it's one informed person talking to another. And that it was that the interior work that someone needed to have a transformation needed to be done singularly, that it couldn't be really done in a group. Von Lutenkow comes to him, recounts what's happened in Alcoholics Anonymous, gives him the book. 2 days later, she goes back to have tea with him. He invited her to have tea, and he gave her a rundown of what he thought would be things that would be helpful in having this group work spread. So Jung actually had a change of mind regarding groups because of the experience of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this work Ian McCabe has documented really nicely in the book Carl Jung and the 12 Steps of Individuation. And so I never believed, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said no, that the only contact that happened between Jung and Wilson was in 1961. But indeed, Jung gave the blessing to this group work, and he changed his mind when he talked about people, because in Alcoholics Anonymous, this volitional work that's done, this application of the will through the steps, it's only kept alive because of the working with others. It's sustainable. And this is the thing that Jung had been diffident about, was he didn't find that the spiritual experience could be sustainable within an organization, that it is the individual that needed to keep it alive. And of course, that's what many of our experiences are. So in 1955, Wilson makes this declaration of independence, and he says, I'm going to go live my life, and A is going to go live its. He in 1956, he actually resigned, and the board accepted his resignation, and they had full separation financially and everything that was going to happen, but there was this thing that there was some work that he needed to do regarding the operation of the organization and the like, and he never actually was able to finish it. But the work that they were talking about in those days is what we know now as the 12 Concepts of World Service. But Wilson says in 58, he goes, look, I'm going to be out by 1960. I'll be done. We'll have the convention in Long Beach. That'll be it. And if I can, there are 3 areas that I really want to apply my life. The first is this thing of bringing Alcoholics Anonymous's experience to the general population. The second is developing a rational theology, something that is not based in dogma, that's not based in superstition, that's not based in fable, that people can actually have personal experiences and show them how that can be done. And then the other aspect that he was very interested in was proof of survival of the soul after the death of the body. And the one of the tools, for the rational theology may be the use of psychedelics. So there were these these different aspects, and these were the things that he was going to that he wanted to apply in his life and devote himself to. But of course, Alcoholics Anonymous overwhelmed his desires. He was involved with a lot of amazing people, and they did a lot of amazing things. But Alcoholics Anonymous always was always overwhelmed any personal enthusiasms that he had. So I know that most everybody here has read the correspondence between Wilson and Jung, but I think that I think that it's real. I'd like just to read this to you. I think it's it's 6 of the most important paragraphs that we have as a resource in the fellowship. I just have to. I want to grab it before. Dear Mr. Wilson, your letter has been, so first off, I should, okay, we can do this in a few minutes. So Wilson always wanted to write Jung a letter and say, hey, dude, we feel that, or I feel that our movement started in your office when you told Roland that you couldn't help him anymore. And he gives a long, it's in Language of the Heart, and it's available through the grapevine, both of these letters from Wilson to Jung. And he always felt that he needed to do this, and he just never got around to it. He figured, Jung's got all these people that are writing him. I'm never going to get it. I'm never going to get through to him. There's just no need to do it. He then is talking about it, and he talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And a friend of Helen Wynn's, Rhoda H. Rhoda was friends with Analia Jaffe, who was Dr. Jung's personal assistant. And she said, look, if you want to get something to the doctor, his health isn't really good, send it care of Analia Jaffe. And so Bill actually sits down, he writes the letter, and thanks to Jung, and sends it off, and he gets a response like within a week. And Jung says, your letter's been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland anymore, and often wondered what has been his fate. Our conversation, which he adequately reported to you, had an aspect that he did not know. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that in those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I found out that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland, but what I thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, union from God, union with God. He goes on to say that you may be led to this experience by an act of grace, or from honest contact with friends, or with education of the mind beyond mere rationalism. And he goes on to say that it's apparent that Roland, followed the second, becoming aligned with the Oxford group, and that it worked very well. He said, it's interesting that in Latin, you use the same term for the most depraving poison as you do for the highest spiritual experience. Therefore, the helpful formula would be spiritus contra spiritum, the spirit of the universe against the spirits in the bottle. He also said that that unless there was protection from above, or a wall of human community that would accept someone, that they could not go into relapse. And I think that Alcoholics Anonymous is a wonderful demonstration of that. Wilson gets this letter back from Jung. I mean, can you imagine one of the most brilliant minds in the world has just given him a confirmation of the spiritual solution that Alcoholics Anonymous uses? And he gets really excited, and he writes a little note to the trustees, and he says, as you know, Dr. Carl Jung is one of the founders of modern psychiatry. Recently, I wrote him in thanks for his part in the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. His highly interesting reply is enclosed. Apparently, we shall have a good friend in him. So Wilson has this, he has the ear of Carl Jung. Now, when you have the privilege of reading through his letters, his first letter is on one level, and his second is at another. And on the 20th of March, he wrote a letter to 61 to Jung, thanking him for the letter, saying that he wasn't going to share it except with some close co-workers. He talks about that years ago, he read with some benefit a book called Jung's book, The Modern Man in Search of the Soul. And that book was actually a gift from Marguerite von Luthenkow. And at Stepping Stones, it's there, signed by her to him. It's really, really sweet for strange people like me. But he talks about this idea that Jung had about that, in that book, he talks about that if a person gets to the age of 40 and he doesn't have any real religious connection, that that they're lost, and they start looking for other ways to cope with their psyches. And he said that this is the experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, that there are people that have this that they get to the not drinking, but unless they engage in some kind of a spiritual thing, that it's very difficult. He goes on to say that many people go back to church, but many also get into different types of spiritual seeking. He says, I'm one of them. Then he goes on to ask Jung about what he thought about proving the survival of the soul after the death of the body, and whether using modern instrumentation and the like, we might be able to actually prove it. And what did he think about that kind of an effort? And then finally, he wraps up by talking about his use of psychedelics and the work that Hoffer and Osmond were doing in Canada. And he asked Jung what he thinks about that. When I first read that letter, I was just thrilled. And then, but because of when it was in late March of 61, I thought that Jung hadn't read it because he was very, very sick. And then just recently at the archives at Stepping Stone, I found a note from Analia Jaffe, his Jung's assistant, and she says that I want you to know that your materials are are safe here at the top of my desk. I gave him to Jung. He read them. He wanted to write back to you, but he had a relapse, and the doctor prescribed complete rest. He said that he is very, very interested in the work of Alcoholics Anonymous. And anyway, that was the Jung ends up dying at the end of May, and so there wasn't any further conversation. But I find it very invigorating spiritually myself that the conversation that Wilson has with Jung is exactly the conversation that Jung had with James 50 years prior. This thing about the evolution of the soul, and like. The last thing I'll mention, because Jung did not respond to the thing, is that I have a letter that Jung wrote in response to someone in 1959 about using lysergic acid. And he said, although it may be helpful to the barbarous indigenous person, he said, to Western man, he said, I believe it's an ersatz or a false experience because it's stimulated by something from the outside.